My name's Ryan, I'm 42, and my wife, Melissa, is 40. We've been married for 18 years, and for most of that time I thought we had a solid relationship. We have 2 kids together. Our son, Ethan, 16, and our daughter, Chloe, 14. Life hasn't been perfect, but I always thought we were a team. Melissa has always been complicated. She's strong-willed, fiery, and fiercely independent. It's one of the things I loved about her when we first met, but over the years it's also made her difficult to deal with. She has a way of deflecting blame and twisting conversations so that she's always in the right, no matter what. Things started to feel off about 6 months ago. Melissa became more secretive, spending hours on her phone, brushing off my questions about where she was going, and getting defensive when I tried to bring up my concerns. She'd always been a little guarded, but this was different. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. She just started a new job as a project manager at a tech company, so I figured she was stressed or adjusting to the workload. But then she started going out more often, claiming she had work dinners or networking events. I didn't think much of it until one night when she came home late, smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off and said, "Relax, Ryan, you're being paranoid." Paranoid. That word stuck with me. I wanted to believe her, but something about the way she said it felt off. It wasn't just the words. It was the look in her eyes, like she was daring me to dig deeper, knowing I wouldn't like what I found. The truth is, I didn't want to find anything. I didn't want to be the guy who doubted his wife. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And as much as I tried to ignore it, the nagging feeling in my gut refused to go away. Little did I know, I was about to uncover a secret so twisted, it would change everything I thought I knew about Melissa and about our marriage. A few weeks after that night, Melissa's behavior became impossible to ignore. She was practically glued to her phone, laughing at texts and smiling in a way I hadn't seen her smile in years. Not with me, anyway. One Friday evening, she told me she had another work dinner, and left the house dressed to the nines in a black dress that hugged her in all the right places. She'd never dressed like that for me in years, and the thought of her doing it for someone else made my stomach churn. After she left, I couldn't shake the unease. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but desperation has a way of pushing you past your boundaries. I grabbed her laptop, which was sitting on the kitchen counter, and opened it. Melissa's email was still logged in. I hesitated, staring at the screen. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of guilt and dread coursing through me. But then I thought about the cologne, the late nights, and the way she dismissed me every time I tried to talk to her. I clicked on her inbox. At first, everything looked normal: work emails, shopping receipts, the usual. But then I saw an email thread labeled, "Can't wait to see you, Red Heart," from someone named Liam. The first message was from Liam. "Last night was incredible. I can't believe how lucky I am to have found you again. Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful." And Melissa's response. "It feels like fate, doesn't it? Like we were meant to reconnect after all these years. I'll meet you at the usual spot around 8. Love you, Red Heart." My blood ran cold. Reconnect? After all these years? What the hell was she talking about? I clicked through the rest of the thread, piecing together a story that made less and less sense the more I read. Liam wasn't just some random guy. He was someone from Melissa's past, someone she hadn't seen in over 20 years. Then I scrolled down further and found a bombshell. In one of the earlier emails, Liam wrote, "It's crazy to think how life turned out. All those years apart, and now we're here. I know I'm not supposed to feel this way about you, but I can't help it. You're everything to me." And Melissa replied, "I feel the same way. I've missed you for so long. I never thought I'd get the chance to be close to you again. Not after everything that happened with the adoption." The adoption. I froze, staring at the screen as the pieces started to come together. Melissa had told me years ago that she'd had a baby when she was a teenager and given him up for adoption. It was a closed adoption, and she swore she'd never had contact with the child after that. But now it was clear that wasn't true. Liam wasn't just some guy from her past. He was her biological son, and she was having an affair with him, I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking, and stared into the darkness of the kitchen. My head was spinning, and I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just infidelity. This was something darker, something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Melissa wasn't home yet, and I didn't know what I was going to say when she walked through the door. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was over. Melissa came home around midnight, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she walked into the house. She looked surprised to see me sitting at the kitchen table, the laptop in front of me. "You're still up?" she asked, her tone casual as she set her purse down. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her, my mind racing. Finally, I spoke. "Who's Liam?" Her expression froze for a split second before she forced a laugh. "Liam? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Melissa," I said, my voice low and cold. I pushed the laptop toward her, the email thread still open on the screen. "I know everything." She glanced at the screen, and her face turned pale. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she let out a frustrated sigh and crossed her arms. "I don't know why you're snooping through my emails, Ryan. That's a serious invasion of privacy." I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. "Don't you dare turn this around on me. I'm not the one sneaking around and lying to my family." "Who is he, Melissa? And don't you dare lie to me again." She hesitated, her lips trembling as she tried to decide what to say. Finally, she muttered, "He's someone I used to know." "Someone you used to know?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Melissa, he's your son. Your biological son." Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, as if I'd physically struck her. How did you?" "I read your emails," I snapped, "and now I want the truth. How long has this been going on? How did this even start?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't buying the act. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "Liam reached out to me last year. He found me through some adoption registry. First, we just talked about his life, about what he's been through. I wanted to get to know him. I didn't mean for it to turn into this." "You didn't mean for it?" I shouted, standing up from the table. "You're sleeping with him, Melissa. Your own son. How do you even justify that to yourself?" She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. "It wasn't like that at first," she said, her voice shaking. "We connected on a level I can't explain. It's like we were drawn to each other. I know it's wrong, Ryan. I know. But it's not what you think. It's not just some dirty affair. It's complicated. Complicated." I spat.
No, Melissa.
"This is disgusting. This is sick. Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To our kids? To him? You're his mother. For God's sake." She started sobbing, but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. All I felt was rage and betrayal. "I want him out of our lives," I said firmly. "You're going to end this, and you're going to do it now. Do you understand me?" Melissa didn't respond. She just stood there, crying and shaking her head. "Do you understand me?" I repeated, my voice rising. She finally looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. "Then maybe there's nothing left to save here," I said, my voice cold. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of what she'd done. Upstairs, I locked the bedroom door behind me, but it didn't feel like enough. I wanted to escape, to run as far away from her as I could. Instead, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the unthinkable truth. The woman I'd loved and built a life with wasn't just unfaithful. She was a stranger capable of something I couldn't even comprehend. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. My mind was a storm of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Melissa's tear-streaked face, heard her say, "I don't know if I can." I tried to hold it together for the kids, but it wasn't easy. Ethan and Chloe could tell something was wrong. Ethan, ever the observant teenager, cornered me one evening. "Dad, what's going on with you and Mom?" he asked. "You've been acting weird, and she's been crying all the time." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to unload the entire horrifying truth. But I couldn't. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this nightmare. "Your mom and I are just working through some things," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "But don't worry, okay? We love you and Chloe more than anything." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded and left it at that. As soon as he walked away, I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. I was lying to him just like Melissa had lied to me. Meanwhile, Melissa was a shell of herself. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was always the same. Apologies, excuses, and pleas for understanding. "You don't get it, Ryan," she said one night, her voice trembling. "I didn't choose this. It just happened." "You didn't choose this?" I shot back, my anger flaring. "You're trying to tell me you had no control over sleeping with your own son? That it was some kind of accident?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "You keep saying that," I said, my voice cold. "But you still let it happen. And now, I have to live with the fact that the woman I married is capable of something so monstrous." She started crying again, but I walked away. I couldn't bear to look at her. The worst part was the shame. I felt humiliated, not just because of what Melissa had done, but because I hadn't seen it coming. I'd been so blind, so trusting, and now my entire life was in ruins. I started seeing a therapist. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. I needed someone to help me untangle the mess in my head. "It's normal to feel a mix of emotions," my therapist said during our first session. "You've experienced a profound betrayal, and it's going to take time to process that." "Betrayal doesn't even begin to cover it," I said bitterly. Still, talking helped, even if it didn't fix anything. It gave me a place to vent, to sort through the chaos, and to start figuring out what I wanted to do next. One thing was clear. I couldn't stay in the same house as Melissa. Being around her was like being stabbed in the heart every single day. But leaving meant leaving Ethan and Chloe, and I couldn't do that to them. I was stuck, torn between protecting my kids and protecting myself. And all the while, the question loomed over me like a dark cloud. What kind of person was Melissa? Really? And how had I been so wrong about her? The tension in the house was unbearable. Every interaction with Melissa felt like walking through a minefield. She'd try to engage me, but her words only grated on my nerves. "I'm going to therapy," she told me one night, her voice wavering. "I want to figure out why this happened." "Good," I said curtly, not bothering to look up from the paperwork I was filling out for work. "But don't think therapy will magically fix this, Melissa. Some things can't be undone." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I was too angry, too disgusted to offer her any comfort. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and Chloe. They were the only reason I hadn't walked out the door yet. Every time I saw them, I felt a pang of guilt, knowing I was keeping the truth from them. One evening, Chloe asked me, "Dad, are you and Mom going to get a divorce?" The question caught me off guard, and I struggled to find the right words. "Why would you ask that, sweetie?" She shrugged, her big eyes searching my face. "Because you don't smile anymore, and Mom cries a lot." I knelt down and hugged her tightly, my throat tightening. "Your mom and I are trying to figure things out," I said, my voice cracking. "No matter what happens, we'll always love you and Ethan. That will never change." Her arms wrapped around my neck, and in that moment, I realized how much my kids needed stability, even if I couldn't provide it with Melissa. That night, after the kids were in bed, I made a decision. I walked into the living room where Melissa was sitting, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. "We need to separate," I said, my voice firm. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. "What?" "No, Ryan, we can work through this. I'm going to therapy. We can go to couples counseling. Please, don't give up on us." "I already have," I said bluntly. "You gave me no choice, Melissa. What you did, it's unforgivable." Tears filled her eyes, but I kept going. "The kids deserve a stable home, and I can't give them that while I'm living under the same roof as you. I'll stay here for now so they don't have to move, but we're done. You need to find somewhere else to stay. You can't just kick me out, she protested. This is my home too. Then go stay with Liam, I snapped, the bitterness spilling out before I could stop it. Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it came. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her tears anymore. I'll give you a week to figure out where to go, I said, standing up. But this marriage is over. I left her sitting there, her sobs echoing behind me. Lying in bed that night, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. Melissa had destroyed our marriage, and now it was time for me to take the first step toward moving on. The week leading up to Melissa moving out was filled with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. We barely spoke to each other, only interacting when necessary for the kids. She tried a few times to plead her case, but I shut her down every time. Ryan, can we just talk? Please? She asked one evening as I was cleaning up after dinner. There's nothing to talk about, I said without looking at her. Don't you think I deserve a chance to explain? She pressed, her voice trembling. I slammed the dish I was holding onto the counter and turned to face her. Explain what, Melissa? That you had an affair with your own son? That you've destroyed our family for something so disgusting I can't even wrap my head around it? What could you possibly say that would make any of this better? She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, her eyes filling with tears, and I walked away. The hardest part of it all was keeping things together for Ethan and Chloe. We agreed not to tell them the full truth. How could we? Instead, we told them that Mom and Dad needed some space to figure things out, and that Melissa would be staying somewhere else for a while. Ethan was skeptical. This isn't just about space, is it? He asked me one night when we were alone. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Your mom and I are going through something really difficult, I said carefully. But I promise you, no matter what happens, we'll always be here for you and Chloe. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded and didn't press further. Chloe, on the other hand, was heartbroken. Is it because of me? She asked tearfully when we told her about the separation. No, sweetheart, I said, pulling her into a hug. This has nothing to do with you or your brother. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and it takes time to figure out how to fix them. But I promise you, we love you more than anything. Melissa moved out on a Saturday. She packed her things in silence, her face pale and tear-streaked. The kids were at a friend's house, so they didn't have to witness it. As she loaded the last of her bags into her car, she turned to me. I'm sorry, Ryan, she said quietly, for everything. I didn't respond. I just watched her get in the car and drive away, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. That night, the house felt unbearably quiet. The kids came home and went straight to their rooms, and I sat alone in the living room, staring at nothing. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself cry, not just for what Melissa had done, but for the life we'd built that was now gone. The marriage, the memories, the future I thought we'd have, all of it was shattered. I didn't know how I was going to move forward, but I knew one thing for sure. Staying in the wreckage wasn't an option. It was time to rebuild, no matter how impossible it felt. After Melissa moved out, the days felt long and heavy. I threw myself into a routine. Work, taking care of the kids, and avoiding the mess of emotions swirling inside me. I couldn't fall apart. Ethan and Chloe needed me to be their rock. The first week was hard. Ethan barely spoke to me, and Chloe cried herself to sleep more nights than I care to remember. I tried to comfort them as best I could, but the guilt of what they were going through, what Melissa had caused, gnawed at me constantly. Melissa, meanwhile, kept her distance. She moved in with a friend and reached out only to coordinate time with the kids. She was trying to appear cooperative, but I could sense her desperation. She'd text me things like, "Please let me explain," or, "I know I made a mistake, but I still love you." I ignored her every time. About 2 weeks into the separation, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Liam. "Ryan," he said, his voice hesitant. I need to talk to you. I almost hung up right then and there, but curiosity got the better of me. What could you possibly have to say to me, Liam? I didn't know she was my mom at first, he said quickly, like he was afraid I'd hang up. When we met, she didn't tell me. She just said she felt connected to me in a way she couldn't explain. I didn't find out until later. My grip on the phone tightened. And you still went through with it? I didn't know how to stop, he admitted, his voice cracking. She made me feel wanted, like I finally mattered to someone. I wanted to scream at him, to call him every name in the book, but there was something in his voice that stopped me. He sounded young, scared, and broken. You need to stay away from my family, I said firmly. Do you understand me? Don't call me. Don't contact Melissa. And stay the hell away from Ethan and Chloe. I understand, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Ryan, for everything. I hung up, my hands shaking. That conversation left me feeling more conflicted than ever. Liam was just as much a victim of Melissa's manipulations as I was, maybe even more so. But knowing that didn't make the betrayal any easier to bear. In the days that followed, I started taking small steps toward rebuilding my life. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in years, started going to therapy more regularly, and even began working on a home project I'd been putting off for years. Through it all, my therapist kept reminding me of one thing. This wasn't your fault, Ryan. Melissa's choices don't reflect on you. I wanted to believe that, but it was hard. Every time I looked at Ethan and Chloe, I felt like I'd failed them by not seeing the signs sooner. Still, I knew I had to keep moving forward. Melissa's actions had left a deep wound, but I wasn't going to let them define the rest of my life. Slowly but surely, I started to feel the weight lift, even if only a little. And as much as I hated to admit it, cutting Melissa out of my life was the first step in finally finding peace. For a few weeks, things seemed to settle into a fragile routine. Melissa had moved out and we were sticking to a basic custody arrangement. She'd take the kids on weekends while I had them during the week. But then, just as I started to feel like I could breathe again, Melissa threw a wrench into everything. I want joint custody, she announced one evening when she came to pick up the kids.
I blinkte her, stunned.
What? It's not fair that you get them more than I do, she said, crossing her arms defensively. I'm their mother, Ryan. They deserve to have equal time with both of us.
I stared her, incredulous.
You think you deserve joint custody after everything you've done? After the example you've set? She flinched but didn't back down. I know I made mistakes, but I love them. They need me too. I laughed bitterly. You mean like Liam needed you? Look how that turned out. Her face hardened. I'm not going to let you use that against me forever, Ryan. I'm trying to fix things. I've started therapy, and I'm doing everything I can to be better. You can't just cut me out of their lives. This isn't about me cutting you out, I snapped. It's about what's best for Ethan and Chloe. And right now, they need stability, not the chaos you've created. She glared at me, her jaw clenched. Then I guess I'll see you in court. And just like that, the fragile peace shattered. The custody battle that followed was brutal. Melissa tried to paint herself as a devoted mother who had simply made a mistake, while my lawyer and I leaned hard into the evidence of her betrayal. The emails, the affair with Liam, even her initial lies about who he was. All of it was laid bare. At one point during the proceedings, Melissa broke down on the stand, sobbing about how much she loved our kids and how sorry she was for everything. It was a calculated move, and I could tell some of the people in the courtroom were swayed by her tears. But I refused to let her manipulate me, or the judge. When the final ruling came down, I was awarded primary custody. Melissa was given supervised visitation, with the possibility of revisiting the arrangement after a year if she showed progress in therapy and rebuilt her relationship with the kids. She was devastated, and part of me felt a pang of guilt. But then I reminded myself of everything she had done. Not just to me, but to our family. This wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting Ethan and Chloe. After the ruling, Melissa tried to approach me in the courthouse parking lot. Ryan, please, she said, her voice shaking. I'm begging you. Don't keep them away from me. I looked at her, my heart hardening. You did this, Melissa. Not me. If you want them in your life, prove you're worth it. I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing there alone. That night, as I tucked Ethan and Chloe into bed, I felt a sense of relief for the first time in months. The battle wasn't over, but at least now I had some control over the situation. Melissa had taken so much from me, but she wasn't going to take my kids. Not if I had anything to say about it. After the custody ruling, life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan and Chloe were with me most of the time, and I did everything I could to create a stable, loving environment for them. But it wasn't easy. Chloe, especially, struggled with the situation. She missed her mom, and no matter how much I tried to explain that the custody arrangement was what was best for her and Ethan, she couldn't understand why Melissa wasn't around more. "Why can't I see Mom whenever I want?" she asked one evening, her voice small. I knelt in front of her, trying to choose my words carefully. "Sweetheart, your mom is working on herself right now. She's in therapy, trying to make things better, so she can be the best mom she can be for you and Ethan. But why can't she do that while she's here?" Chloe pressed, her eyes filling with tears. My heart broke. I wanted to tell her everything, to explain just how deeply Melissa had betrayed us, but I couldn't. She was only 14, too young to carry the weight of the truth. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I said gently. "Big mistakes. And when that happens, they need time and space to fix them. But just because Mom isn't here all the time doesn't mean she doesn't love you. She loves you very much." Chloe nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied with my answer. I hugged her tightly, wishing I could shield her from all the pain Melissa had caused. Ethan, on the other hand, was more closed off. He didn't ask questions, but I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. He threw himself into school and sports, barely speaking to me or Chloe unless he had to. One night, after Chloe had gone to bed, I found Ethan sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars. "Hey, bud," I said, sitting down beside him. "Hey," he muttered, not looking at me. We sat in silence for a while before he finally spoke. "Why'd Mom have to ruin everything?" His question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," he said, his voice bitter. "She's the reason everything's messed up now. Why couldn't she just not screw up?" I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "I don't have a good answer for that, Ethan. Sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they love, even if they don't mean to." "That's a cop-out," he said sharply. "She didn't just make a mistake. She blew up our whole family." I looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his anger. "You're right," I said finally. "She did. And I know that's not fair to you or Chloe, but no matter what happens, we're still a family. It might look different now, but we're gonna get through this. Together." He didn't respond, but after a while, he leaned his head against my shoulder. It was the first time in months that he'd let his guard down, and I felt a flicker of hope. Rebuilding trust with the kids was going to take time, but I was determined to do whatever it took. They'd already lost so much because of Melissa's choices. The least I could do was make sure they didn't lose me too. Little by little, we started to find our footing as a family. It wasn't perfect, and there were still hard days, but we were moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were going to be okay. Months passed, and though the wounds Melissa's betrayal left behind were still there, they began to heal. The kids and I settled into a new normal, one built on honesty, love, and a determination to move forward. Melissa stayed in therapy and gradually started to repair her relationship with Ethan and Chloe. I let them decide how much contact they wanted with her. Chloe saw her more often, eager for the connection, while Ethan remained distant, only agreeing to see her occasionally. I kept my boundaries firm. My relationship with Melissa was over, and I had no interest in revisiting it. Whenever she tried to bring up our past or hint at reconciliation, I shut it down immediately. "Our focus is the kids," I'd remind her. "That's it." As for Liam, he disappeared completely. Whether it was out of shame or fear, I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. The damage he'd caused was irreparable, and I had no interest in ever hearing his name again. Through therapy, I learned to let go of the anger and resentment that had consumed me for so long. It wasn't about forgiving Melissa or excusing her actions. It was about freeing myself from the weight of it all. I also started focusing on myself again. I took up running, something I hadn't done since my 20s, and reconnected with old friends. For the first time in years, I felt like I was rediscovering who I was outside of being a husband and a father. One unexpected bright spot came in the form of a coworker named Sarah. She'd been at the company for a few years, but we'd never interacted much beyond polite small talk. After a team lunch one day, we got to chatting, and before I knew it, we were laughing and sharing stories like old friends. We started meeting up for coffee during lunch breaks, and over time it became clear there was something more there. I was hesitant at first, scared of opening myself up to someone new, but Sarah was patient and kind. She didn't push. She just showed up, quietly and consistently. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch and thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The betrayal, the pain, the fallout. It had all been unbearable at times. But through it all, I'd learned something important. I was stronger than I ever thought I could be. Melissa's choices had shattered the life we built together, but they didn't break me. They forced me to reevaluate what I wanted, what I deserved, and what I was capable of. As for advice to anyone going through something similar, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. And when the truth comes out, no matter how devastating it is, remember that you have the strength to get through it. Life doesn't always go the way you planned, but sometimes, the unexpected twists lead to a better path. For me, that path is still unfolding. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of where it might lead. Thank you for staying with me. This crazy journey is finally over and I'm ready for what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.